Hi, and welcome back to the show. I'm really excited today to have on my good friend, Darren. Darren is in AIB Merchant Services. He's the Associate Director of SME Payments, and he's really knowledgeable in this space. And I've had loads of great chats with Darren. Met him in Dublin. Fantastic guy. And you know the way sometimes as a retailer, you think of merchant services, and it's like, sometimes you don't realize how easy they are to actually reach out and speak to. And many times retailers don't pick up the phone enough to talk to these guys and to get some crucial information that could really help them drive growth in their business. So I'm excited to talk to Darren. We're going to really focus on, again, leadership, belief-based leadership, which feeds into this as well. But Darren, can you maybe give us a little bit of an insight into what you guys do there, what you do in the SME payments part of it?
Yeah, thanks, Louise, and look, thank you for having me on your podcast. It's a pleasure to be here, and look, we've had many great conversations, as you said, in the past, so I'm delighted to be here. Yeah, look, in relation to what we do, so there's multiple things we do for retailers, but just to name a few, we provide retailers with data analytics, point of sale, website build, gift cards, industry trends, and then training and education in all things payments related. I'm working with SMEs and retailers for the best part of 15 years, and as someone who started my own career in retail for my first 5 years, it's a privilege to be able to continue to work with retailers in this space within the SME environment. So yeah, look, in terms of what we do, payments at its core, or its simplest point is the settlement of funds into a retailer or merchant's bank account. But there is more to it, and the industry has evolved so much over, the last 5-10 years. And retailers may or they may not be, it either know that it's available or what's out there, but there's so much more to it. As I said, just to name a few, the likes of website build and point of sale and data analytics, all this part is part of a service that acquirers can provide.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the the analytics, I think, Darren, is something that I see that we're not leveraging enough as a sector. And I think at times the analytics, when it comes to some retailers, it is more it's more driven by, we're having a crap time, guys. Q1
Yeah,
isn't meeting the metrics. We're not. Whereas I think really every quarter reviewing those, obviously you're looking at them every day, every week, but coming up
yeah,
with some sort of a strategy and even talking to you guys, because
yeah,
what I didn't know, Darren, and I've worked at retailers for a really long time, and it really surprised me was the data that you can actually give retailers is absolutely, it's one of the best out there at the moment, from understanding the type of customer that's coming in to the store, and understanding the segmentation of customers, and getting that real-time data so that they can maybe segment their customers, look at certain offers, promotional campaigns, specific to that local region nationally,
yeah.
and then have a really good targeted campaign by using those data analytics that you guys can provide from your merchants. So I think that there's a huge scope there, Darren. It's definitely something that I think I'll definitely, like, we need to definitely have you guys explaining and even doing a case
Yeah.
study with us again, because I think it will really open people's eyes to, how do I use this to implement an ROI in my business? And there is a lot there that you can do to do that, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, and we'd be happy to do so. I think any educational piece that we can, put out there for retailers and SMEs, I
Yeah.
don't think any education is too much. The more you put out there, the more you support people, and this stuff is free, Louis. This isn't like a product that is charged. It's a retailer's own data. From point of sale, from what they have in their stores, and what's going through the card machine, and exactly as you said there, the demographics, how you segment it. Can you use it for your own marketing opportunities? And even if it wasn't for marketing, it helps you understand those demographics, those segments. And yeah, look, absolutely, we'd love to, maybe do something further down the road that can support retailers in that regard.
Yeah, and I think for them to see what it is, Darren, because for them to actually get an idea of this is what you do, because I think that would be a great way for people to see the value that you're adding
Yeah,
in that, because some people would have to pay for other solutions, software solutions to get
yeah,
those analytics. So you're actually saving because you're bringing that those resources to that payments piece, which is an added value, I think. So it's absolutely fantastic. Um, so we're going to jump right in, I suppose.
sure. Yeah,
We're all talking about leadership. There's before we came on air, I was just talking to Darren very briefly around there is a lot of issues in the moment in the retail sector. We've seen from the unfortunately the new looker exiting the market. That's
yeah,
really, really disappointing to see, and I just bring it into the conversation because it's very fresh. It came out last week. 347
yeah,
jobs that are now going to be people without jobs, which is really, really sad to see. And then I seen it was yesterday, Benetton, which is a clothing brand, is exiting. So that they're predominantly in the UK, but they haven't been performing for a number of years. So they're also going to be closing a number of stores. So we're seeing this big influx, I suppose, Darren.
yeah,
And what I'm seeing a lot of the time, which feeds into this, is retailers are really struggling. Obviously, we've had a lot of increases across the board, and I'm not going to go down that
of
rabbit
course.
hole because
Yeah,
there's a lot to play within that and a lot of uncontrollables. Okay,
yeah, yeah,
um, but within that, I suppose that where the struggles are is we have a lot of businesses that we haven't really future proofed the business. We haven't done succession planning really
yeah,
well. We haven't looked at setting up our business. If key people leave, that we're not then seeing it from a cost perspective, that we're taking the hit on profits because we don't have people in the business that can, fall in and really take charge and support in the growth of the business. So leadership for me is a big part of the puzzle to why we
yeah,
do things well and we don't do things well, and obviously culture falls into that and
of
values
course.
and everything else.
Yeah.
Can you maybe describe, to give people a context, Darren, what kind of leader you've had in your career that's had a really positive impact on how you've performed as an individual, and what led to your success, because you're doing really well in your role at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've been quite lucky in my career to date, and I've worked with a few good leaders. And look, I think when you've experienced either a bad leader or a good leader, you appreciate having a good leader. And I think if I was to say who's had the most impact, I've had a career now of nearly 19 years, in terms of positive effect and performance. I'd say it's probably my current direct line manager. We've worked together for nearly 10 years now. Like over the years, he's been a mentor, he's been a coach, he's been a leader, he's been all of the above. Look, and I think what I've learned from him, is the importance of collaboration, both internally and externally. So he always says, treat your internal customers as you would your external customers. Who's your internal customers? It's your peers and your colleagues, isn't it? And
Yeah.
your other departments. It's just as important. Being adaptable, resilient, and the importance of investing in people development. And that's just to name a few. I've picked up many things from over the years, and I think having a leader like that, someone who is a mentor, someone who is a coach, someone who believes in people development, it all ties into, like we just saying there, succession planning or business continuity. Like I always say, I believe great leaders create more leaders, whether it's with a title or without a title. You've got the next person or the next couple of people trained up. You want them to be upskilled or learn as much as possible. So look, I've been very lucky, and I would say, look, my direct line manager of the last 10 years has probably shaped my career the most.
Yeah, yeah, and that's I think when we're on those journeys, Darren, I know I had a few times where I was like, why am I doing this? Or you might be challenged, or is there any point in that where so I'll tell you where my biggest leap was, to give
Yeah,
context. When I went from the shop floor to supervisor, I really struggled because
yeah,
Struggled for a few reasons. I didn't understand how to delegate. I
Yeah,
thought that the manager done all of the work and they had
yeah,
to support the team, and then there wasn't a there wasn't a balanced approach in that. And that kind of then led to me feeling frustrated, feeling not
yeah,
supported, but I wasn't communicating clearly what I wanted from other people. So from the outside looking in, I
yeah,
wasn't asking people to do the tasks. In my head, I was hoping that they would just come behind and help me. And it took
yeah,
me a while to figure out that, people aren't going to do that unless you like communicate it out clearly what you expect from them. And that's expectations it falls into and all
yeah,
that. Has there been any kind of learning moment you've had where you've been like, aha, I get it. Like I
yeah.
kind of where you've learned, or you might have had feedback given to you, or someone has said something, you've like, okay, I see it now from that perspective.
Yeah, look, 100%, and especially probably early on in my leadership journey, and you spoke about delegation there, and learning to
Mm.
delegate. I think probably if I was to look back in, the last 7, 8 years, if I was to change one thing, it would be to delegate sooner. When I first stepped into leadership, I thought you had to take on absolutely everything. I
Yeah.
was, a novice going into it. There's processes, there's policies, there's tasks, there's workflows, there's outcomes.
Yeah.
And then I said, the one thing you nearly will not forget about, but you need to focus on building relationships. You have a team as well, so there's all of the above here. So I would say for me, it was probably the aha moment, and the feedback I would have gotten, at the start of my journey in terms of leadership was learn to delegate, you know,
Mm.
learn to trust your team, do that from the get-go or as quick as possible. You're one person, don't take on absolutely everything because you'd be too stretched at all times, which means you can't focus on one single thing. And look, we know ourselves, there's always things that come up that have to have more focus than others at certain points of time. So yeah, look, I think the feedback that I got at the start was learn to delegate.
Yeah, yeah, I love that one. And that's something I think it's probably underestimated a little bit. And understanding how to actually, and sometimes it's as simple, Darren, as having words to say. And I think
Yeah,
people underestimate this. Like, how do I say it? Like, I don't
yeah,
want to come across bossy. I don't want to come across condescending. Like they've been in the role a while. How do I approach it with that person?
yeah,
They've been here longer than me, but now I have to manage them. And it's as easy as just spitballing that out with someone. It could be someone that you work with,
yeah,
that's, a mentor or coach, or they're in a senior role, and you're going, okay, and then should I say this, or would this sound better, and it's getting it out of your head and then figuring it out, and then
yeah.
that really helps you then transition and translate that then in the outside world to that individual, I think. Yeah.
It is, and it's important, and I think in my first 6 months when I stepped into leadership, I
Mm.
think my direct line manager had said you knocked on the door every single day for 6 months. So look, I think it's important that you do ask the questions. You do have the confidence to ask. When you step into leadership, you're not expected to have all the answers from day one. You
Yeah.
know, but you are expected, I think, to ask the questions. And like you said, there will be people that one minute you're their peers, next minute you're their leader or their coach or their mentor, and the way they view things, it does shift, it does change. You're their peer on a Friday, and Monday, for example, you could have stepped into a leadership role, and it kind of the dynamic kind of shifts a little bit. So you have to be comfortable or become comfortable having those conversations. That you have gone from being a peer to being a leader now, and being that person's team lead or that. So look, my advice there is to be comfortable in having conversations, not with just your own team members. You absolutely have to have them as quickly as possible when you step into leadership, but also with your own leader, your own coach, your own mentor. And as I said, look, I think every day for 6 months I was knocking on doors asking questions. So you know
Yeah, that's amazing, because I think, Darren, you touched on something there that's really, really prevalent, that I think sometimes, and I had someone approach me there about a year ago. They said to me that I was made a manager they were in HR, and
yeah,
they said, "Hmm, I've never done a manager role. I've never been in charge. I've never led any teams." And they felt under pressure that they had to know everything, that they were
yeah,
given this title, and now they've been given the title, they feel that their line manager is kind of expecting them, because they told them they're a manager, that they need to
Yeah,
have all of those qualities and skills and traits. And I think what
yeah,
you said there is a really great way of putting it, that be vulnerable, and
yeah.
be curious around that as well. So being curious, asking all those great questions, but be vulnerable enough to go, I don't have all the answers, but I'm going to learn and I'm going to ask loads of questions. And I think, really honing that growth mindset, which is what you obviously done when you went into that role, which is amazing. Mm.
And having the confidence, and look, it can be a hard question, especially when you're new into leadership yourself. But asking that question, of your own manager, what do you expect of me in this role, or what can I do in my first 90 days to hit the ground running? And I know that can be a hard question, but if you
Mm.
do ask that question, you can get from the get-go the clear expectations of what people expect of you in that role. And look, I would say confidence, comes into this when it comes to, your questioning. But look, in the short term, while it might feel uncomfortable, in the long term, it stands to you, from your own learning perspective. Because look, regardless of our roles, we're all people. We all want to learn. We all want to grow. We all want to
Mm.
upskill and develop. So I think just have that bit of confidence and say, look, what's the expectation of for
Mm.
you, for me in this role?
Yeah, and I think the big thing there with the confidence thing, there's a saying, competence breeds confidence, and I
Yeah,
think it's such a true thing, because I think people expect themselves to be confident in new in a role, or
yeah,
they feel there's an expectation of external people
yeah,
expecting them to feel competent and confident in the role, when they haven't actually maybe done a lot of those things yet, had
yeah,
difficult conversations, delegated,
yeah.
dealt with crisis management, dealt with problems with individuals, mediation,
Yes.
so much that goes on in that world that people probably don't realize. And you're doing a lot of that. And I think it is understanding, and the expectation thing is very much underestimated. And I think if everyone had a new manager that came in and sat down with them and said, I don't expect you to be a superstar. I
Yeah,
expect the first few months to observe, to
yeah,
figure out, to understand people's personality types, to get to know the team and the dynamic and the strengths and whatever, and figure out the type of leader you want to be. Then after that 3 months embedding, or 4 months or whatever, then look at maybe, what are we going to do about it? Do we need to have more conversations? What are the one-to-ones looking like? Whatever that is. But I think it would take the pressure off a lot of those individuals that go into those roles. Yeah.
absolutely. And I think it allows you to avoid miscommunication, spot any potential gaps, any training gaps, whether it be for the new manager, whether it be for the team. I just think it just so, as long as there's not a big gap between, say, the new manager or the new leader, the team, and the leader above, that it's not too far apart, that there's a miscommunication. I think having those conversations early, and having that bit of confidence, to ask your own manager, you know, what do you expect of me in the first 90 days, or what's the ask here? So look, and don't get me wrong, I know that can be uncomfortable for people, to ask those questions, especially if they're new and they might think, I need to hit the ground running and do absolutely everything.
Mm.
But looking back on my own journey now, I would nearly say to people, slow down, ask the questions. Yes, it's a new role, yes, it might be your first time in leadership, but take
Mm.
a step back,
Mm.
and see, what do people want from me here, what do they need,
Mm.
and then kind of learn from there and go from there. I think that would be the first step.
Yeah, brilliant. So retail can be really challenging at times. And I know this, I've been in the environment, you've worked in teams, like you're obviously talking to loads of retailers.
Yeah,
Darren, what do you think is needed? What do you see is the kind of the gap there for retail leadership teams to really thrive, I suppose, at the moment? What do you think? What do you think the fixes are? What do you think the solutions are around that, from what you're seeing?
look, I've seen it from the industry, but also from a consumer perspective as well. Look, we all go into stores, we all, buy things or have a need to buy things. And look, I think empowerment, of the floor staff is a big one.
Mm-hmm.
Give the autonomy to do the role. Again, it comes back to clear communication, expectations, what's
Hmm.
expected of the staff, has that been communicated to them?
Hmm.
And then take a step back. and let them get on with the role. Empower them to do the role. If there's gaps, okay, you can address those gaps. But I don't think someone, on the floor can really learn if they're not empowered, or there hasn't been clear communication on what's expected in this role. What do you need to achieve here? What's the ask? And also, this is how you deliver. This is how you do it. So, I think empowerment is a big thing. Especially it would help around kind of leads into employee development. You then, if there's gaps or upskill training, they're available, you go into employee development, and then if you develop your employees, you've got staff retention, and then you start to build a highly skilled team over the months and the years. Now, look, I know the pressures are there for retailers, for SMEs, that things can be week to week, month to month, quarter to quarter, and there's always those short-term pressures there. But I think, if we link it back to succession planning and long-term planning, empowerment, collaboration, I think employee development, and I think a big one, especially in retail, is having a customer-centric approach. It's responding to customer demands, offering personalized experience. And I think especially in today's market, that's vital for staying competitive.
Yeah, and I think having that understanding of who you want to be in the marketplace, what you want to be
Yeah,
known for. And I think and I think this is where a lot of retailers, probably the clarity around their brand, their offering.
yeah,
If I look at a retailer that's really, like, I think doing really well in the market at the moment, there's a Dutch brand called Rituals that I worked with at
yeah,
one point, and they're absolutely doing a fantastic job, and they have created that experienced environment, Darren, whereby you go into one of their stores and they're all about, engaging and brand activation through the
yeah,
senses.
yeah,
So they spray their room spray. When you walk in, you can smell it. They have like a water island, they call, which is like a really fancy sink. Okay.
yeah,
Really pretty. Okay. And you can use the products, and they encourage you to use the products, and then they
yeah,
give you their herbal tea. So, and it comes from, because they're Asian traditions, is
yeah,
where the story of the brand comes from, and each one of their products is an Asian tradition. And one is from Japan, it's the
yeah,
Sakura ritual. So it's about the Sakura tree, but they've a very clear understanding of the story of each product, of,
yeah,
the benefits of the product, the brand, and you know what you're getting when you walk into the store,
yeah,
from an experience piece. And I think that the thing that I see a lot of the time with retailers is that they're stuck with, we're just going to put stock on a website or stock on a shelf, and it's
yeah,
going to sell, and we're going to wait for it to sell, because that's the way we've always done retail, and
yeah,
it's good, and it's just not good enough now,
yeah,
because we have such a huge offering from an online piece, and unless you're offering
yes,
a reason why I should leave my house, drive into town and pay for parking to go into
yeah,
your store, and it needs to be a very good reason,
yeah.
then I'm not really going to bother doing it, So, that's, and are you seeing a big, huge amount in that, where people are investing in those experiences or the personalization, Darren, or they're trying to change that?
Yeah, 100%, Louise.
Yeah.
And some of the stores I've been into recently myself, again, even from a consumer perspective, and for me, for someone who's, I said, both worked in retail but works at retailers, I'm very big into, when I walk into a store, how I'm approached, how I'm engaged with. I'm always rooting for the person that's coming to me to say, really sell this to me now, please. I want to buy this now. I know I want it, but will you really have a go at
Yeah.
this? And I'm always very conscious of how the interactions are, and how the engagement is. So yes, absolutely, like, you do see this, and I think certainly for some of the stores I've been in, like, the improvement over the years in terms of that engagement, you can see engagement is a key part of probably a wider strategy. And look, there's so much when it comes to strategy, we could talk all day, there's so many different parts to it, but you could see that customer centricity, engagement are clearly parts of those strategy. It's somewhere along the customer journey. One thing I would say about Irish retail, the engagement generally is very good. You know, there's probably still some areas of improvement, but I'm sure we could say that about all of us and everything. Definitely from, you know, when I was working in it, I can see the engagement levels that it's obviously a core focus, or it makes up one part of a core focus.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a huge focus as well, Darren, around, I suppose, brands now are, you know, they're looking at kind of building a community around their brand. If you look at
Yeah,
Gymshark, if you look at
yeah,
Lululemon, if you look at any of these other brands that have been, and a lot of the sporting brands, even Nike, you know,
yeah,
their brand is worth more than the actual business. And the same with
yeah,
Coca-Cola. So if we look at any of these brands, but they're quite good at building a following. I would
yeah,
say building a community around them. I think Nike or Adidas, one of them, have a really good community app that they use. And
yeah.
they do events and stuff. So do you see that happening much in the Irish market, or do you think there's scope to kind of really drive that? Or what do you think are the reasons we're not maybe doing as much as that as maybe the other brands?
So we're definitely doing a bit more, you know,
Yeah,
versus 5 years ago, versus 10 years
yeah,
ago.
yeah,
Is there opportunity? Is there scope to do a hell of a lot more? Absolutely, there is.
yeah.
Where I think it's difficult for, you know, retailers, and this is where we really try to support retailers at AIB Merchant Services. You know, you talk about a store, you put up a store and you leave the product there, and that's it. It just sells. You know, once you kind of go into the omni-channel world or the online world versus the storefront world, it's not as simple as just putting up a website and going, let's now leave it at that and people will come and buy. There's a whole way you have to try and market yourself online, but also, you know, there's SEO, there's, you know, PPC, there's a whole separate element of that. And retailers, their experience, their background is retail. They're not expected to know absolutely all of this. They're busy enough as it is trying to run the day-to-day store, get people in through the doors. You know, without being, you know, website builders or marketing experts as well. So I think absolutely there is scope for, and I'm talking specifically more of the SMEs. You know, you have the huge brands of the world that have teams and teams and teams of people
Yes, exactly.
behind them. It's a
Incredible.
different.
Yeah,
It is different. You
yeah.
know, there's the challenges are different for the SMEs, especially in the Irish market. You know,
Mm,
we were probably a little later to the game versus, you know, probably our European peers when it came to digital transformation and, you know, and
yes.
online. You know, but having said that, we have improved, you know, over the last probably 5 years, and, you know, probably COVID accelerated probably some of that a little bit, but it has continued on. Um, so I would say yes, we've absolutely improved, but there's definitely a lot more that can be done for retailers and for SMEs out there, because look, it is difficult. Nobody's expected to know absolutely everything. You know, a lot of retailers are going off the advice that they have, either through, you know, you know, maybe peer-to-peer network, you know, maybe groups that they're part of. So it's kind of a lot of hearsay, and sometimes when it's hearsay, that's okay, but it's only when they get really down the road into this and they've spent a lot of time, they go, that may or may not be the best for my business. So
Mm.
it is difficult, but absolutely there's support out there and there's more that can be done.
Yeah, yeah, really good. Are you seeing with the e-com side of things, Darren? And I know we've kind of spoken in the past, like there is some retailers who are doing really well. Pet Stop
Yeah,
are doing
yeah,
a fantastic job.
yeah,
Anthony Gallagher and his team are really smashing it in that space.
yeah.
Are you seeing a lot of retailers, I suppose, leveraging that more, or are you seeing any other retailers out there that you feel are really change makers in that space, that you feel are just really like the pinnacle or the model of where we should be at?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there are definitely more that are leveraging it.
Mm,
You know, is there any one running away with things? I wouldn't say there's any one that's running away with it. I would say more have come on board. I would say there's more retailers now to say, okay, we know we need to have a physical store and an online presence in some shape or form. And ironically, actually, some of the trends we're actually seeing, and I actually think this is a great opportunity for retailers, but there is a bit of a trend happening at the moment, and look, long may it continue, hopefully, because there seems to be an opportunity, where you buy online but you pick up in store, or you buy online and you return in store. And we're kind of thinking, well, that's great for a retailer, because if you're getting people there, you've got people browsing online, but they'll actually come in and see you in the store if they're in the locality. And it comes back to these demographics then as well. It gives them a chance to upsell. Is there a loyalty program? Is there a gift card they can sell? Can they increase their average ticket? That engagement, that interaction that they may not have had the opportunity if it was full online. So I think this is great, because this is where online complements the physical store. It should never compete with each other. It should be running parallel to each other. That's two parts of your business. You've got your in-store and your online. But we seem to be seeing trends, and we're in a time now where consumers are utilizing one to go into the other. So long may that continue potentially.
Yeah, and it's a great opportunity. The click and collects are a fantastic way to drive, to drive more sales, because they're in the store anyways. So you can have a conversation around a new product you launch, or you could show them a new display or whatever it is, or if they're coming in to buy something, you can stroke up a conversation that way. So it is, I think, just like it's like having an extra arm in which to sell it in. It's not that it's gonna take over. And I think people, maybe, Darren, sometimes are under the impression, a lot of people that aren't in the sector, maybe, that don't know the stats, come up to me and go, "Jeekers, Louise, it's very bad. There's going to be no shops left." And I'm going, "There will always be physical stores," and they think that nobody is buying in stores now because everyone is going online. And if you actually look at the percentages, from an e-com perspective, Ireland versus Europe versus the US, it's not as big of a percentage as what people think it is. So it is a percentage, and you should leverage it, but it is not taking over the physical stores in any
No, I don't think so, Louise, and I don't think it will. As I said, physical store, e-commerce, they should always complement each other. I would always say that any retailer, SME, should absolutely have both. Never put all your eggs in one basket and have one over the other. E-commerce, as I said, is absolutely an opportunity for further growth, but it's not there to replace your physical store. And look, there's just certain products, maybe from my own perspective anyway, I want to go into a store, I want to talk to people. I look at the information up online, I'll probably convince myself 90% of the way I want to buy it, and then I'll go in for the last 10% interaction to say, please keep me right here, because I did want to buy it, so please make sure I've read this correctly. So look, there's certain things, when I'm looking up online, look, before we came on, I was telling you, I'm moving into a new house, buying furniture, for example, and I look furniture up online, but I want to go in, I want to sit on the furniture, I want to touch it, I want to feel it, I want to talk to the person, I want to talk about deliveries, where's the stock coming from, how long does it take, all that good stuff. So will e-commerce kill physical stores? Absolutely not. Is it important to have both? Absolutely, yes, it is.
Yeah. And I think it's important to understand where that offering sits. And I think it's really interesting because consumers now are more educated than ever. Okay.
Of
So
course.
they have just as much product knowledge going into an electrical store. They've checked the spec of that electrical item. They've read the reviews of that electrical item. They probably know and have researched it a heck of a lot more than what you know. Okay. You might know the returns procedure with that particular supplier, but beyond that, right, as a retailer, they probably know, to be fair, just as much as you, because they've researched the heck out of it before they come into you, right? But I think that's where that interaction piece, and giving them peace of mind that if something goes wrong, that you can come back. I think that if you look at the amount of returns that people do with online orders, they absolutely hate returning them to the post office. They absolutely hate it, So there is such an opportunity for retailers in this market to leverage that. And I think, you touched on it there with the click and collects. I can imagine a lot of people do click and collects in the store because they can return it through the store that return it to the online store.
Yeah.
So because I know I ordered something on Tommy Hilfiger, collected for my
Yeah.
son in the store because they gave me a wrong size when I purchased it online. The warehouse,
Yeah.
it was no one's fault. It was just a wrong sticker on it. So I opened that box, I checked the sizing, and I
Yeah.
left. But I went into the store to do it. Because I didn't want to have to get it delivered to the house and have to do that return procedure again. So I think there is definitely a scope there for us to leverage those opportunities a lot more with footfall and bringing in those additional people into the store and to visit us and to maybe entice them into buying more products. Yeah.
100%. And I think the return in store one is probably even the bigger one of the two, because if you are returning something in store, something else catches your eye, or there's a 10% off this, or there's always something there that will keep you engaged, or keep you curious at a minimum, or it's an opportunity that, if you have this information available, if that's a first time customer, for example, you're conscious that, okay, they bought online, it's the first time they've actually bought from our store. You want to give it goes back to that customer experience piece, that customer centricity. Then you want to give them that, that level of engagement. And who knows, if there's a loyalty program, maybe sign them up to a loyalty program, if they have one. Or there's just so much that the scope is there. And as I said, I mean, the fact that these trends are here now, I hope it's something for retailers for a long time that's here to stay.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, to support them a lot. I'm a big advocate for believing in other people. I think it's something that I live by in my own life, my own journey in retail. I think believing in others is it's actually funny, but I done a TED talk on it one stage, but it's funny in the sense that I didn't realize how important it is on the shop floor with teams, but also with customers, that you're always looking for those good moments. You're always looking for the goods and catching people doing the right things at the right time. And that feeds into positive psychology, that we're looking for the good instead of the bad. Is there someone in your life, it could be a teacher, it could be a coach, it could be whoever, that you feel really believed in you at a time when you didn't really have that belief in yourself, Darren?
Yeah, look, I think that belief, when someone has belief in you that you may not have in yourself, I think it's crucial. It's absolutely crucial when you have people like that in a business, that they spot something in someone and believe in someone. Like you said, they may not have that themselves. And I know myself, very early on in my career, when I first started, look, I was an absolute workhorse. My personality is work, work, work. I knew the work ethic was strong. I knew the work ethic was there. But absolutely, I came to believe in myself at the very get-go, at the very start. I probably limited myself to, okay, these are the roles and responsibilities that I have. I know I'm good at. Could I ask for more? I probably won't, because I don't believe that, I can take them on, or if I take them on, I probably won't do them well enough. So, has there been anyone there? Absolutely. Look, and I got lucky early in my career when I had a very good manager when I was working in retail. He had me come from, my position was, I was working in the back. I was doing a lot around kind of stock, around inventory. I didn't need to be seen as much as other people, and kind of at that stage of my career, that suited me. I was happy I was in the back, I was numbers, I'm number driven, I was like, this is great, because there's one stock, there's 100, but he saw there was more to me than counting numbers and counting stock. And he brought me out onto the shop floor, and I just went, whoa, this is a whole new world. There's bright lights here, there's people, there's questions being asked, there's point of sale systems, there's phones ringing. I was young. I started off at 18 in retail, and I had a really good manager when I worked in retail, and he, look, if it hadn't have been for his belief in me, the penny dropped at that point. It was an I can do attitude. It was a mindset shift. It was, I'm not destined to just do one thing or have one role or one responsibility. So yeah, I mean, look, Louise, I've been very, very lucky. I had a really, really good manager when I first started off in retail many, many years ago now at this stage. Less
Yeah.
gray hair, less gray hairs ago.
What do you believe that the future of retail and retail leaders need to have, qualities wise or values wise, going into this? I think that's a really nice story you shared, Darren, around that, because I think so many people that go into retail, it's not a chosen career. They fall into it. They might have dropped out of college. They might have seen that they're kind of figuring out where they're going.
Yeah,
And I think having those people like that to just to champion them,
yeah.
for them to see, as you said, a different perspective or a different mindset. You know, do you think that's needed more? Do you think there is that is something that is going to really help the industry as a whole evolve and grow?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'd nearly go as far to say that, every business should nearly have a mentorship program of some sort.
Yeah,
It doesn't have to be a black and white rigid, but if
yeah,
it's not there,
yeah.
you're reliant on that individual having that skill set to know and spot. And look, reality is we go back to retention. If you have one person within a business that has that mindset, of mentorship and coaching, and they love to upskill people or train people, if that person moves on, who fills that gap? Where if you go back to succession planning and a mentorship program, and you're
Mm,
upskilling people, you're keeping people engaged within the business, you're upskilling them, they're learning, they want to learn, they want to stay, but you also take the pressure off the business and that one individual, of leaving that to them. So whether
mm,
that's an external company coming in and running a mentorship program, or a coaching academy coming in and doing that, or an internal one, I
mm.
think all businesses should look to have, as part of strategy or succession planning, some sort of mentorship program or guide.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's really important, to support people, and
Yeah.
people feel that to kind of be the best that they can be. Um, if I was to go to your head office or talk to your team, how would they describe Darren as a leader? What would they say about you?
Do you want the honest answer, or which one? What do you want?
This is
uh,
being recorded, so yeah.
no, okay. So we'll give you. It's being recorded, so I need a recorded answer. No, look, Louise. I think people would say, I'm probably a strong people leader who puts a focus on people development and upskilling. I'm a big believer in the analogy of, if you give a person a fish, they eat for a day, but if you teach a person to fish, they eat for life. So
Mm,
there's a short term and a long term view in that analogy.
yeah, yeah,
If you just give people the fish and let them eat for one day, okay, their hunger is gone for one day, but why not teach them a skill that they can eat for life?
yeah,
And look, that's just my personal motto, where I'm working now, but also where I started, and probably going back to, someone else believing in me at the start, and that's kind of resonated with me through my career and now. And I've recently taken on within the last 12 months, I have a manager report into me, and the feedback he would have given me is that I've learned a lot from the start that you
mm,
probably had to, go back 7-8 years. You've given me all the tools from the get-go. So I'm hoping, what I've learned has resonated with him as well. So no, look, I think people would say, look, a strong leader puts a lot of focus on people development and upskilling, and really gives his people the team and the tools to
mm.
succeed and believe in their success.
Yeah, I love that. That's fantastic, Darren. And it's having trust, belief in them,
Yeah,
and seeing the potential, because a
yeah,
lot of the times, you're relying on that person that's ahead of you. That's, your could be your line manager, it could be, whoever that is in the business
yeah,
to guide you, because you don't have all the answers. So I think that's really, really important. And also to ask your team for feedback. And I think
yeah,
sometimes managers are afraid because they're like, oh, they're just going to complain about the company, Louise, or, oh, Jesus, like, is it not a bit like odd asking? I'm like, no, 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 because that's how
yeah,
you're going to grow as a leader, by getting feedback from your team and understanding, is there anything I can do better to support you? Is there anything I can do to make it easier in your role day to day? Or what is it you're finding a challenge that we can work on together? So Yeah.
And it also ensures, Louise, there's no, there's been no miscommunication in previous messages or asks or expectations. And, if there's any gaps or there was a miscommunication, you can have that conversation and re-engage. So look, you reverse the roles slightly. It may seem, oh, well, your team member might feel, oh, I'm giving you feedback. They might not feel confident in doing so,
Yeah.
But at the same time, the manager or the leader has to feel confident in going, okay, that's the feedback. Let me take that feedback on now and try to do something about it, and really have a good conversation. And it allows into future one-to-ones or future conversations to say, look, based on the last conversation, this is where we are with this now. So, it gives an opportunity for further conversations.
Yeah, this has been really, really interesting. Darren, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for coming on. If people want to reach out to you, Darren, how can they get in contact with you?
Yeah, look, I'm very active on LinkedIn, so either a direct message on LinkedIn or my email address is darren.flanagan@aibms.com. And look, I have a calendar there and my email signature, so feel free to drop me an invite at any time. And if there's a day two to this and there's anything more we can do for retailers, we'd be happy to do so.
Okay, thank you so much, Darren. I really appreciate your time and thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Louise. Thanks a million.